Good morning to you. This is another edition of what I like to call my Joe's Book Review. I'm sure there's plenty of those kind of things out there on YouTube as it is, but this one's mine to get my own tastes involved. It is Sunday, December 22nd, about 6 in the morning. It is cold out there today in Jersey. It is about 15 degrees right now, so I have to double check after the snow in the last couple of days if I have any ice on my sidewalk, because I do not want to have any accidents happen that's going to hit my insurance or my pocket through a lawsuit. I just finished the latest of the Splatter Westerns yesterday. Okay, this is Kristopher Rufty, and he wrote The Devoured and the Dead. Okay, this video should actually be a short one today. And this isn't disparaging the book because of that. I don't have too much to say about it. This is the 12th Splatter Western book that I've done a review for so far. There's actually 13 in total if you count. There was one video of like the 4 comic book one-shots that I did on. But, you know, I'm into these things. It's a genre I accidented upon one day, and I haven't looked back because I never heard of horror westerns before in the thread, the way that they're doing it. So it was a find. You can actually find all those book reviews on this channel, on this playlist as well, the Joe's Book Review playlist. So, if you want anything else, Splatter Western is actually in the title, so you should be able to find it pretty easily. I gotta make a point on editing for these books before I start. I know generally I kind of put any disparaging marks at the end, and I reiterate more often than not, it is not my intent of a channel like this to shit on things. I know that some people are making great YouTube careers being just that, whether it's talking about the woke agenda or talking about how shitty Disney has created like Marvel and, Star Wars these days. And they'll just complain, and people love to hear it. And I'll say, once in a blue, I want to hear it. But every now and again, I start looking at my feed and I'm like, God, this is just all negative stuff. I just want to hear a good story, So, not my intent to talk about these things. I'm literally just talking about the latest books that I've read and giving you my opinions and letting you know, hey, go out, support these people. So, but when it comes to this publisher and the books they come out, I have a beef when it comes to, it's an extreme disappointment when it comes to the typos in the book. This book here was released on November 2nd, 2021. Now, granted, this whole company really launched a lot during the pandemic. Their first book, The Magpie Coffin, you'll also find that around here as well, came out in March 8th, 2020. Okay, so there was 12, this is the 12th book, so there's 11 books before this. Now, one of the things that booksellers know when it comes to this, which is interesting because usually you can't find these in bookstores. You will not find this in a Barnes & Noble. You might be able to get it online, but you won't find it physically in their store. Okay. However, the smaller mom and pops might have some of these things, or they know about them. Because when my wife bought me one of these books about a year ago, she knew I was talking about it and I got some already. She went from store to store to store and she couldn't find them, but they knew about them. Okay. And in their knowing about them, they did talk about like, yeah, you are going to get editing problems when you go through it, but as far as the story is concerned, usually they're pretty decent. So it has that reputation of letting typos slip through, of having things that just don't make sense. And I don't know if it's like a budget thing of the publisher themselves. I don't know if writing has gotten lazier because and I'll talk about that in a second, but because I see this online a lot in news that comes through in blurbs that you see online, in the trending nows and whatnot, there's typos everywhere. So I don't know if just writers or publicists or journalists or whatever are just lacking on this because, oh, does spelling count is become more of the lay of the land. But I will say that to people like me, yeah, spelling counts. So, like I said, this is the 12th book that I've read, and I've done 12 book reviews. Now, one of them actually in the original batch of these that came out in the 2020 and 2021, I've actually skipped over for the time being. That one's called The 13th Coyote, which I think that was released on December 29th, 2020. Okay, but in its place, I actually put the sequel to the Magpie Coffin called For a Few Souls More, because that came out later on, April 25th, 2023. So, I knew in advance that the 13th Coyote was a trilogy, so I wanted to hopefully get all three of them together so I can read them one after another in order. Unfortunately, I found no news online of when it might be available to the public. So, I mean, I hope it comes out soon. I know writers hate hearing about like, hey, when's your next installment coming out there? But I have so much to read on my bookshelf as it is that I can always wait and hit it later on. But again, there's been 11 books before this, and it happens too often. And I noticed this, and I talk about it in some of my reviews, and in some of I'll call it the middle books, meaning there's the first batch of like 1 or 2 or 3 that came out, and then you come down to number 12 now. So, after those first few came out in the publishing release order, I had seen the typos decrease. So I get to the point that in my own head, if I think back at it, I don't really remember it enough that I've mentioned it in my reviews. I mean, I may have, but there's been very, very few until now. And that's why I use phrases like negligence and disappointment, because, the 12 books into this publishing series, it's significant to still see these things, unless the publishing company themselves just doesn't edit. They do nothing to edit. They say, oh, you give it to us. If we think the content fits our genre, boom, it goes out there. Now, one of the things I do is, if there's something interesting in a book, I dog-ear the page. And I tell you what, I dog-eared the typo pages, and there's a lot. So let me go through the top ones that I had seen here, and I'll even tell you why I think there's an issue here. So the first comes on page 12 in this. And here's the sentence I'm going to read to you. Before I drifted off to sleep, I do this when I record as well. I fumble. I just get back on the horse and I keep continuing. Before I drifted off to sleep, I heard Ahote telling Daddy that if things went as well as they did today, we'd be at Harvest Hill in 13 days. And it's like, wemped? Oh, they used an M instead of an N. So if things went well, we'd be there. But no, he just wemped. And here's the text of it. I'll put this little thing on the bottom of the screen. So, and you'll see, and like I said, if I just look at something as very simple as using Microsoft Word, okay, I don't know if people are still writing on typewriters, if they're handwriting it, or if they're using maybe dictation software. But even then, you've got to double check the things that come out of it too. So, but if you see here, Microsoft Word, they physically red underline a misspelled word. So, you can see this blatantly if you use that most common of word processors. And by the way, when you're done with it, you hit an F7, the thing will check your whole document. Okay, so again, these are things that pop right out if you're typing them. The second one is on page 79. It says, Floyd moved behind her at some point and gripped her upper arms to hold her in place. And for some reason, there's a plus sign in the word in. And by the way, the highlight here is done by me. So it's like, It obviously isn't there. Anyone who would read the sentence would be like, hey, what the hell is that? Page 94. This is a bad punctuation. They threw an extra space in front of a comma. So the sentence reads, I was still hungry, but I no longer wanted to eat. And again, looking at Word, they blue underlined this one, saying, hey, there's something not quite grammatically right here. You got to do something about this. So it tells you right away. Page 132, I think, was a mistake. So it's one outlaw telling another outlaw, hey, does she have a gun? And the guy's like, yes, they do. He goes, grab it, and then they move on. But for some reason, grab it is done as a question mark. He literally goes, grab it, and then we can get on. So, and this one could possibly be too nitpicky, because by the time that's the problem, is by the time I was aware of all these spelling mistakes that I was coming into, my mind was now just attuned to it. I read this book over a 3-hour setting, right? Twice at a plasma place I was donating, did an hour in each one. And then once yesterday, it was snowy, people were gone, I had only one kid to watch. I read the last 100 pages in the afternoon. I could probably make a small no prize here saying, like, oh, you know something? Maybe the question mark is good. Maybe he's asking the guy, hey, did you grab it? Even though the prior sentences don't really think that he did. So, but again, I think it's just a bad punctuation. Fast forward to page 147 is another bad punctuation, and this time the quotation wasn't done after the sentence, it was done as the dialogue tag. So, they ate him, he says. But it wasn't they ate him, he said. And the quote was should have been after him, as in they ate him, he says. That's where it should be. And I may be able to let this one slide a little bit, as if someone was kind of like looking inward and repeating what was said along with what someone else said. As if it was like, think Return of the Jedi. And Luke's talking to Ghost Obi-Wan. And he says, your father did die from a certain point of view. And if Luke goes, from a certain point of view, he says, it can fit. I doubt it wasn't the case here. I could see where it could work, but these were hillbillies, and they're probably not so much into introspection that much. So, next one is page 175. Though my arms were taut behind my back, I could move hands a little. And it looked like it should have been one of those, I can move my hands. Move hands a little just doesn't seem proper. Even if it is the verb, there it is again. Even if it is from the verbiage of a man who's writing this down in the future about events he doesn't recollect very well. But still, you're an author, you're writing a story. And finally, on page 204, the last paragraph of this page, there's a spacing problem here. And yeah, nitpicky, but every paragraph is indented. And for some reason, this guy goes from the second to last paragraph to the last one, and there's no indent, or maybe the sentence should have been attached to the one before it, but it's just left justified, and it just visually looks off. So that's 7 instances that I've brought up here in a 244-page novel. Okay. And I think I might have gone off on this in some length on one of the first 2 videos that I did for Splatter Westerns. There's a longer section near the end of one of those videos where I discuss how when this happens, when you misspell something so badly, it pulls the reader out of being in the page. It totally and completely destroys the immersing into the world. And you want, as a reader, to be led into the world. You want to forget what's going on there. So if you're sitting there and you're reading Game of Thrones saga, you're in Westeros and you're seeing the Khaleesi with the dragons and someone's trying to steal them and blah, blah, blah. You're there. And in your mind, the dragons are flying around and the Khaleesi is being strong and trying to stand up to the aggressor trying to do something. And all of a sudden, boom, misspelling. And it's like, wait a minute. Now I'm sitting in my chair or in my couch and I'm reading a book. I was just in the land. I wasn't even sitting here anymore. My environment didn't matter in reality because my imagination was dreaming and taking me somewhere else. And it's something as simple as a spell check or a grammar check or even a simple proofread would pick this up. And I wouldn't have to talk about it. Not that I have to, but it's like I said, it just destroys the illusion. And with that disillusionment comes my disappointment. God, I almost hope that Death's Head Press could hire me just to give it a one quick read through to pick out these obvious errors before they go to print. And I do understand, again, I have to compliment Brandon Sanderson for letting me know about this in his lectures, but when it comes to editing, there's like 6 or 7 different types of editing. There's content editing. So everything could be spelled right and grammatically correct, but they're looking at to make sure that your content flows. There's style editing to make sure that, hey, if the one hillbilly always talks in broken English and says things wrong, he always does. Don't let him speak Shakespearean at one point after calling someone an idiot, And then there's the grammar, syntax, and spelling, which is the most common one. So, and all I say here is just, come on. I thought I was past this as far as the books came out later on, I was seeing less and less and less. But unfortunately, boom, this one spikes it back up. And I'm afraid of the next 7 or 8 that I have on my shelf there. I'm just going to encounter it more and more. Okay. After ranting for about 15 minutes now, I'm going to finally talk about the book. I want to make sure I'm trying to divorce this issue from the content. So I'm disappointed in the product. Now let's talk about what the product is meant to be. Okay. I'm sorry. I'll try to put a tag in this video so people can just fast forward if they want to as well. So I can easily talk about what this book is about because from the get-go, literally the first sentence of this book, they give you something so it's not a spoiler. Okay. The book begins with a very simple sentence. They ate the baby. Okay. Already pretty horrific. And between that and the back of the book, which tells you what's going on, you know this is going down. Okay, there's no spoilers going to happen. They set you up saying this goes on. So, but the book itself takes you on the journey of what occurred. It's like you can know what's happening, but sometimes you have to, go through the steps that someone's going to lay out for you to see if you like, a survival horror type of thing. So, I mean, some of the high points in advance, and now you got to walk a mile in the shoes of the people who are actually going through this. So, essentially, you got a few families who are trying to make it somewhere else in the world, okay? They're going from one city or maybe homestead over the snowy mountains to another. They've got all their belongings together, they got their family together, and you get to see the background of who they are, why they're doing what they're doing, and what happens along the way. So you get that this is the journey, okay? And along the journey, like some of these always happen, the caravan starts to come into some problems. The horses that are drawing the wagons and the families with them begin to die. And then it's like, all right, we're in the middle of snow. We can't carry this wagon. Take what you can, put it in the other wagons, let's bundle up, and let's keep going, you know. And eventually they're going to get fully stuck in the snow. And now they're, it's not trapped on a desert island, but you're trapped on a snowy mountain with not enough provisions. It was going to be a 2-week journey to begin with. So you have enough for the 2 weeks originally, maybe a day or two more. Now you're going to have a problem because you can't continue the 2-week journey on time. Some people try to leave on foot to find some support to come back and help everyone else. The others set up camp, try to make a fire, try to get some dry wood out there, because snow saturates wood and makes it hard to burn. And then they try to hunt for food, but obviously to get to where they're going to get to, they're going to be unsuccessful. So their food is diminishing. Okay. And then we get to the gruesome aspect of the tale, or at least the jumping off point of the gruesome aspect of the tale, where they do indeed eat the baby. And then when you get here, okay, so you went along for the ride, you're here for the setup, you go for the event, you go for the who, and you go for the how, okay? And to orient yourself geographically in the novel, okay, we're here at about the 70-page mark, all right? So we're talking in this book, this is what you get to, and that's what's rest. So a little shy of a third of the way through. So he's set the table, put out the knife and fork, you got your first part of the meal, and now it's going to be into the night for the rest of the dinner. There is no pun intended here, by the way. I was trying to visualize this one. But now you get to talk about, because of this event, there's a curse unleashed upon them, okay? Which, by the way, it's in the back of the book, so no real spoilers going on here. And this brings you one of the supernatural elements of the book, okay, which the majority of these splatter westerns tend to have one component of in them somewhere. And I'll tell you what, it's one of the alluring factors of these stories. It's not just a regular western with guns and gruff and horses and a town and a saloon. We're going to throw in a little mystical in some fashion. And sometimes just a little is enough. Although in some of the other books I've read so far, there's a lot more than just a little, which is still wonderful. So just the fact that it's a little, you can tell a whole story based on just a little. And they have. And I'm happy for it. So the rest of the book, the other 2/3, which at first glance, even I was like, God, there's 150 pages left in this book. What the hell are they going to talk about? You've obviously got to go through some of the repercussions of the events and of the curse. All right, so that carries you along. I don't want to say carry. Carry's wrong. Carry almost sounds negative. It guides you along, the events. Because, again, like I said, you're there to hear what happened in this story. It's not one that's going to give you a bunch of ahas intentionally or twists and what have you. It's you got to go along the journey. Okay. You might know what happens later on. For instance, if you're going to watch like the Lincoln movie, or I don't remember exactly what was in the Lincoln movie, but if the whole point of the movie is just to see the assassination at the end, you got to get there and follow the president along the way. But then again, you can have other stories where maybe the assassination's at the halfway point. It's like, okay, that's the thing I wanted to see. What happens next? There's another example of this that's escaping me on the moment in the back of my head, but it happens. There's the point. Oh, I know what it is. Oppenheimer. Okay, Oppenheimer, the story of one of the men who's responsible for the atomic bomb. Okay, that happens. That's where it's going. Okay, however, in a 3-hour epic, when the atomic bomb is created and tested in the halfway point, you're like, shit, there's another whole movie left in the other hour and a half. What can they talk about? And they fill the rest of that movie with other interesting points, which actually phrase the entire story together. So here's the same thing. We've got the event we know is going to happen that we're waiting for at the third mark, 2/3 left. What's going on? So, like I said, repercussions, the curse, what happens, tell us the story. And even as you go along there, he finds a way to add more people to the story. Okay, because we got the two different factions going on here. All right, the people in the Caravanians, is that a word? The Caravanians, are split up in a way between the cursed and the not cursed, and you have the interplay between the two, and it's highly prevalent in this small environment that's made for them. But then you add this third group to the mess, and you even get some of that awkwardness of getting them up to speed and not trying to sound too crazy trying to explain it, because you'll also have some of those pages of they ain't gonna believe you, and some might be just crazy enough to be true, and everything else. So you have to give some credit to Kristopher Rufty here. One, he does sew together those different threads, the personalities, the survival instincts into a nice tapestry. Combining the necessary events and the karma associated together. Okay. And two, he also does this in a better page count than some of his predecessors in this genre before him. So a lot of the books there are some that barely hit the 100-page mark. So he's got one of the larger ones out there. So it's good. And I'll tell you what, except for the first third, when you already know the event and you're just like waiting to get there, you've got to get through there. That second third has enough happening in it, nothing drags. You do get from event to event to event, and it is a page turner. So, despite the fact that the majority of the first half of this video was done, not liking and shitting on and being just completely out of touch with the fact that there was no proofreading or no editing to this book, when you get to the content of this book, I will say it's a pretty decent story. So go ahead, see if you can get it through your library, borrow it from a friend, buy it directly, whatever you got to do. If you like this kind of book, you will not go bad putting this on your shelf. It's very interesting, actually. So I said I read it in 3 sessions, right? The first 2 was Monday and Friday at the Plasma Center, and then yesterday at home. When I was reading the first part, okay, I had not quite gotten up to the event yet, but I was probably at about the 50-page mark. One of the technicians saw, I was reading something, and I chat with this dude often, and I was like, yeah, this is, he looked at the cover, he goes, what is this, huh? And I was like, yeah, this is like a horror Western kind of book. It's like, really? And he took a picture of the cover so he can look it up later on. But I told him, I was like, you know something? If you want to start picking these up, again, I was still on the first third of the journey and I hadn't gotten to the main event yet of what we know. I was like, maybe don't start with this one. Okay. And I pulled out one of the first 2 first. And I was like, start with this one. This one's got a lot of that horror part, a lot of the Western action, bunch of characters. This will get you on the road if you want to take more of these, and again, I'm not disparaging this book for the content. This is one of those ones that maybe if you watch a TV show that says, okay, here's this season arc, but we're gonna have a little, along the way, little day in the life or touch point episodes that maybe there's a piece of the episode you might need for later on. Okay. And for an example of that, I was a big fan of Babylon 5. All right. In Babylon 5, the dude actually wrote almost the entire 5-season arc at once. He had a point. So, but you had to make the story episodic along the way. So there might be one episode where, you get the humans and the aliens, and there's a problem because someone stole a body, okay, of a warrior who's meant to be, exonerated, or not exonerated, but like, given a good funeral, but the body went missing. And then there's a whole episode of who did it, who took it, where is it? Oh my God, this could put, human and alien against each other. Okay. And eventually they get on with the episode, you figure out what happened, it comes to a resolution. Okay. But there's a small section in there where the one alien looks to the human dude and he's like, you've got wisdom. You speak like one of us, And it's a line of dialogue that you'd never think of. You'd never remember it. However, later on in the story, they actually flash back to it. It was one of those things where it was an Easter egg or something along the line saying, we planned this from the beginning, and now that we need it later on, we're bringing it back. Okay, so that's an example to me of when you're going along some of these things, sometimes you need that nugget to keep the episodic going along. Okay, and again, not disparaging it, but this one is almost like on an episodic if you're reading all in the genre. Okay, I wouldn't put it out there as the introduction to the genre, except, I'm just thinking about this now, it would be an introduction to the genre if you wanted someone to slowly get into splatter. Okay, there is blood, there's cannibalism, there's gruesomeness. Okay, and it's done in a survival way. So, like, if you're talking about that, was it the rugby team or whatever? The real story, Alive, where they ate people while they were stranded up in the mountains when the plane crashed. They got to hunger and they eventually started eating the co-pilots or the other rugby people because they needed some meat in order to walk out of the mountain. So if you were going to get introduced to splatter stuff, knowing that this stuff is coming might be a good primer into the genre. Whereas, like I said, the other ones were like, boom, we're going right into there. We're going, you want to get into some gore and some splatter, we're hitting Saw. First thing first. And nothing, we're not going to slowly get you into a 70s one before you get to like the 90s, 2000s one. So I will give it that for as far as like, while I told this dude specifically, you want to get into this, try that book. I wouldn't start with this one. Maybe I should have asked him if he wants to get into splatter. Maybe this one would have been. Unfortunately, I hadn't even finished the book yet, so I wouldn't have thought of that ever. I'm sorry, 33 minutes. Didn't mean to stay this long, but hopefully this will give you some insight as to the genre, as to the publisher, as to the book series in general. For the majority, a lot of these books are one-offs to each other. I do like the Easter eggs. Every now and again, you might see a character referenced or appear in other books. Not necessary to read their main book to see them appear in the other books, but it's always fun to see. Okay, but for the most part, a lot of these so far are one-off stories. You can pick up any one and not worry about there's no what happened before kind of a thing. In very, very few instances are any of these books sequels. Okay, there's only two I know off the top of my head. And again, that was the Magpie Coffin having For a Few Souls More as a sequel. And then there's the 13th Coyote, which I know has Ballad of the Were-Vixens as a sequel. Other than that, I'm not aware of any other ones being sequel related. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day. If you're a holiday person, happy holidays. Enjoy it all. I probably will not have another book finished in the next 2 days in order to give you another one before Christmas, but it is what it is. All right. You take care now. Bye-bye.